Welcome back to the Seth Leibsohn Show. It is a delight and privilege, as I promised, bringing back Congresswoman Debbie Lesko onto the show, Arizona's 8th Congressional District. She is also, blessedly, a member on the newly formed Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic. Congresswoman Lesko, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Seth?
I'm doing just fine. Whenever I talk to elected officials in Congress or the Senate, and I ask how they're doing, they always say great. And I love that you, I love that they are. I love that you say that. But my gosh, the challenges that are thrown your way and the kinds of stuff you have to deal with and the kind of baloney, I wish I could use a different word, you have to put up with in these hearings. I just don't know how you keep that great attitude, but I love that you have it. I love that you have it.
Well, it's because Republicans are finally in control, at least of one chamber, and so I had to deal with Pelosi for the last 4 years, so right. Compared to that, I'm great.
That's right. Well, while we're there, before I get to your comments at the subcommittee on the coronavirus, which we'll do in a moment, talk to us about the tweet you put out. Yeah, we've done a lot, even in the first 100 days of our majority, right?
Oh my gosh, we have. I have so many committee hearings. I mean, that alone, I think one day we had 42 committee hearings, Republicans in general, in one day. But just the other day, I had 4 of them in one day. And so, yeah, we're getting things done. But, yes. We've passed, one of the bills that we passed out of the House was to defund the 87,000 IRS agents that Biden and the Democrats put forward. We also reopened the Capitol to the people. That's the first thing we did. Yeah. And then we ended the proxy voting that was going on. We also passed bills that would prohibit the Strategic Petroleum Reserve oil from being sold to communist China. We nullified the Washington, D.C. City Council's soft on crime bill that lessens punishments for criminals. We protected children born alive by requiring that they get medical attention. Yep. We've ended the COVID-19 national emergency, which Biden actually signed into law. That was Paul Gosar's bill. Uh-huh. And today we passed a bill that would prohibit men from being in women and girls sports. Yep. We passed the H.R. 1, which will reduce gasoline prices and energy prices for Americans. And we also passed a Parents' Bill of Rights, which will guarantee that parents have knowledge of what's going on in their kids' schools.
See, I'm so glad. I am so glad I could have you on to just even to recite those things, because these are not things that either will get reported or reported accurately, as is so often the case. I don't need to tell you, but that is amazing what you can do, even with a slim majority. Yeah. Yes. It's incredible. Yes. Incredible on that women in sports thing, protection. That's it. I saw some terrible comments your colleague Eric Swalwell made about that. Just some of the way that this discussion is taking place is frankly eerie. It's frankly odd to me. I'll put it to you, if I can. I was talking to the former sports reporter Michelle Tafoya the other day on the air about this. It is an amazing reversal of support for women's rights, Title IX, and equality to not support that kind of legislation, isn't it?
Well, yeah, not one single Democrat voted for our bill that would, protect women and girls' sports from having males compete with them.
Just incredible.
And there was some, at the press conference we had, not only did women Republican Congress members speak, including me, but we had several NCAA sports athletes there, women sports athletes, and they told their story. Yeah. They told their story how they had worked very hard throughout, since they were a kid and were trying to get scholarships. And then all of a sudden, a guy starts competing that was competing in the male sports version and didn't make it. So now they're competing in the women's sports and they didn't get their scholarships.
This is the story of no, it's the story of Riley Gaines and so many others. The point Michelle Tafoya was making is some of these young girls, or some of these now, more adult girls, but starting from a young age, they practice their whole life for about what might even be a 90-second competition, only to have it ruined by this nonsense. Debbie, I have to take a quick commercial break. This was a short segment. Can you stay and do a slightly longer one, and we can talk about the coronavirus hearing that you were so key to the other day?
Yeah,
do you have time?
I would love to.
Love to have you. Thank you, Debbie. I'm Seth Leibsohn. She's Congresswoman Debbie Lesko. You can follow her on Twitter at Rep D Lesko, Lesko. We'll be right back. Well, she brings the fire. Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, representing Arizona's 8th Congressional District. Kevin McCarthy put her on the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic to finally try and get some answers to a lot of fog, a lot of cloud, and a lot of lies that even already this committee is exposing. Debbie, thanks for staying with us, and thanks for your service on that committee. You had a great hearing, I think it was this week, if I'm not mistaken, from what I read, where you were asking a lot of important questions about conflicts of interest, intelligence on China's role in the pandemic. What is it you would like the American people to know that you folks have learned from your presence and from your sitting and learning on the COVID Select Subcommittee on coronavirus?
Well, I'd like Americans to know that it's more likely than not that the coronavirus was leaked from the Wuhan lab in Wuhan, China, and that our U.S. taxpayer dollars went to a U.S. company called EcoHealth, which then gave a sub-grant money and funneled money over to the Wuhan lab to do virus research, and that according to a number of the witnesses that have been in front of our committee, they believe that was gain-of-function research, which enhances the pathogen. So what's really shocking is that the U.S. government seems to have funded this research, which then leaked out, caused this pandemic that killed over 1 million Americans. It made hundreds of millions sick, and some with long-term COVID, and that our own government, it appears, some of the officials in our own government were trying to dispel the theory that it came from the lab, including Dr. Fauci and others, and seemingly because they didn't want to be embarrassed or didn't want people to know that the U.S. was funding this research and they were responsible for the funding.
And they ran to their typical go-to whenever that theory was floated, didn't they? They said, "Well, it's just racist to say that. It's racist or bigoted towards Asian Americans or Chinese Americans or Chinese or China generally." To say that. And even the director of the FBI, if I saw his testimony right about 2 months ago, Chris Wray was saying this is the likely scenario. It came from the lab, not the wet markets.
This is the likely scenario.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And this week, you're right, we had testimony, including from the former director of national intelligence, John Ratcliffe, who said that, he said, "I believe that a great majority of CIA officials support that it is a lab leak, but they haven't released their assessment yet." He also testified and said, quote, that the lab leak theory is the only explanation credibly supported by our intelligence, by science, and by common sense.
Yeah.
And then we have found out through the former CDC director that he had told Dr. Fauci early on that he believed it was a lab leak, that Dr. Fauci cut him out of conference calls with other scientists on this issue, and that Dr. Fauci misled the public.
Exactly. Yes, I saw that. That was was that Robert Redfield? I think it was.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was Robert Redfield, the former CDC director.
Yeah.
And then next week, this is going to be a big hearing. On Wednesday, we're going to have Randy Weingartner, who's the teacher union person, come and testify in front of our committee, because as we found out on all of these school closures, instead of listening to science and the CDC's own report that said that children's likeliness of getting seriously ill from COVID was low and that their transmission rate to adults was low, that instead of listening to their own CDC, they listened to the teachers union and closed down schools.
I remember that. I remember reading about that at the time, that Weingarten and her team were helping write, if I'm not mistaken, the policy and procedures for school reopenings. Yeah, right.
Yep, the CDC reached out to them through Biden, and they actually helped write this policy. And so instead of listening to their own scientists in the CDC, and we had testimony how countries like Sweden never shut down their schools. They didn't require their kids to be masked. They didn't require social distancing, and 0 children died from COVID.
That's right. That's right. There was also, I saw some news this week, too, and I wasn't sure if it was your committee or elsewhere. Forgive me, my not remembering off the top of my head, where the current head, Rochelle Walensky, was kind of revising the history as well about what the vaccines could do and what they were saying about the vaccines, if I'm not mistaken. Was that in front of your committee?
That was not in front of our committee, so I'm not. I don't know exactly what she did, but I tell you what, I've talked to constituents and other people that have had very adverse reactions to the vaccine, including parents that have told me that their young male adult children died. And so we need to get to the bottom of what was done wrong, what was done right, because another pandemic will happen, especially if we're fooling around with this gain-of-function research, which enhances viruses, which I seriously think we should defund that and not use any taxpayer dollars for that type of research, especially in China, for goodness sake. You know, there was some really very strange things that happened in China in September of 2019. In that Wuhan lab, they changed over the control of that lab from civilian control to military control. They also changed the whole ventilation system in the Wuhan lab. They also deleted the genome sequence of the virus from their database, asked the NIH to delete the sequence, which NIH did for whatever reason, craziness. And there were Chinese research scientists at the Wuhan lab that got sick. So all of this leads to it probably leaked from the lab. China lied to us. They covered up information. They lied to the WHO. If China would have told us early on that these researchers were sick and were straight with us, we could have prevented a lot of this pandemic.
We could have done so much more. Absolutely.
But
no.
Instead, millions of people died and millions, hundreds of millions got sick.
Not the first time China would be, and the Communist Party of China would be responsible for millions of deaths. Debbie Lesko, thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for being with us. I so appreciate you, as do your very fortunate constituents who have you as their congresswoman. Thanks for spending some of your time with us.
Thank you, Seth.
You betcha. We'll talk soon, I hope.